The police knocked on my door at 5:42 a.m. I remember the time because I stared at the red digits on my microwave while two uniformed officers stood in my hallway, hands resting near their guns, eyes cold and certain. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to take me away. "You're under arrest for armed robbery and assault," one of them said, already pulling out handcuffs. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. "There's a mistake," I said. "I've never even held a gun." They didn't respond. They didn't need to. According to them, the evidence was overwhelming.
Surveillance footage.
Witness statements. A signed affidavit. And the name that tied it all together, my sister's. Lena. My older sister. My protector. The person who raised me after our parents died. The woman who once swore she'd take a bullet for me. As they dragged me outside, neighbors peeked through curtains. Phones came out. Whispers spread like wildfire. I was pushed into the back of a squad car as if I were already guilty, already condemned. At the station, reality began to collapse around me. The detective laid everything out like it was an open and shut case. A jewelry store robbery. One man badly beaten. A getaway car registered in my name. My fingerprints on the steering wheel. A partial video showing someone with my build, my hair, my jacket. And then came the final blow. A sworn statement from my sister claiming she saw me return home that night covered in blood, panicked, begging her not to tell anyone. I felt my chest cave in. "That's a lie," I whispered. "She wouldn't do that." The detective watched me carefully. People lie all the time, especially to protect family. I shook my head, hands trembling.
"You don't understand.
She is my family." What I didn't know, what no one told me yet, was that she wasn't protecting me at all. She was protecting her husband. Mark. The golden boy husband everyone adored. Successful businessman. Church volunteer. Devoted father. The kind of man who shook your hand firmly and looked you straight in the eye. The kind of man who committed the crime. But Mark wasn't the one in the interrogation room. I was. By noon, my mugshot was already online. By evening, my boss had fired me, until things cleared up. By nightfall, my phone was full of missed calls I was no longer allowed to answer. And Lena? She didn't visit. She didn't call.
She didn't even text.
When my public defender finally arrived, he sighed as he flipped through the file. "This doesn't look good," he said carefully. "Your sister is a very credible witness." I stared at the gray wall, my reflection faint in the metal table. The face staring back at me looked older, broken. Somewhere deep inside, a terrible thought began to form, one I tried desperately to push away. What if this wasn't a misunderstanding? What if Lena chose me? Because if Mark went to prison, she'd lose everything. And if I went instead, she could keep her perfect life. Jail smells like metal, sweat, and hopelessness. By my second night inside, I had stopped crying, not because the pain was gone, but because my body had run out of tears. Every sound echoed too loudly. The clang of doors, the distant shouts, the coughs of men who had already accepted this place as their reality. I lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying Lena's face over and over in my mind. She still hadn't come. Not once. I kept telling myself she was scared. Confused. Pressured by the police. That she'd walk in any minute, eyes red, apologizing, ready to tell the truth. But minutes turned into days. On the third day, I was escorted to a glass-walled visitation room. My heart leapt when I saw her sitting there, hands folded neatly on the table, hair perfectly styled like she was attending a brunch instead of visiting her sister in jail. She didn't look guilty. She looked composed. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass. "Lena," I said, my voice cracking. "Thank God you're here. Tell them the truth. Tell them this is all wrong." She met my eyes calmly. Too calmly. "I already told them the truth," she said. The words hit harder than any punch.
"No, y whispered."
"You didn't. You can't mean that. I was with you that night, remember? We watched TV. We argued about." "You left," she interrupted. "You said you needed air." My mouth fell open. That's not what happened. She sighed, as if I were the difficult one. I didn't want to believe it either. But the evidence lines up. The car. The footage. You were struggling financially. You were angry at the world. I was angry because Mark fired me, I snapped. From his company. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Fear? Guilt? Something darker? Then her expression hardened. You always blame Mark for everything. Because he's not who you think he is, I said. He's dangerous. That was a mistake. Lena leaned closer to the glass. You don't get to say that about my husband. I stared at her, realization spreading slowly and painfully through my chest. You know, I said softly. You know he did this. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand what you're asking me to lose. That was the moment my hope died. She wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She was choosing. They'll put me away for decades, I said. I could die in prison. Her voice dropped. And if I tell the truth, my children lose their father. I lose my home. Everything we built is gone. So, you sacrifice me instead? I asked. Tears finally welled in her eyes. But they didn't fall. You're stronger than me, she said. You'll survive this. The guard signaled time was up. As she stood to leave, panic surged through me. Lena, I pleaded. I'm your sister. She paused, hand resting on the door. For a moment, I thought she might turn back. Instead, she said, I can't save you. And then she walked away. That night, alone in my cell, I finally accepted the truth I'd been avoiding. My sister hadn't just framed me. She had buried me alive, so her husband could walk free. And I swore, in the darkness, that if I ever got out, I would make sure the truth did too. After Lena walked out of my life, something inside me hardened. Grief turned into anger, and anger sharpened into focus. I realized that if I waited for someone to save me, I would rot in that cell forever. The system had already decided who I was. My own sister had signed my sentence with a steady hand. That meant I had only one option left: prove my innocence myself. My public defender, Mr. Hayes, visited me a week later. He looked more exhausted than usual, dark circles carved deep under his eyes. They've added more charges, he said quietly. Possession of a firearm. Prior intent. I laughed bitterly. Of course they did. He slid a thin folder across the table. Your sister gave another statement. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Lena claimed she'd found a gun wrapped in cloth in my old backpack, the same backpack I'd left at her house months ago. The police had already recovered it. I felt sick. That backpack hasn't been mine in months. Mark uses it for work trips. Hayes rubbed his temples. Do you have proof? I shook my head. Proof was a luxury I no longer had. But something about the gun bothered me. I'd grown up around firearms. Our uncle had been a hunter. I knew enough to recognize when something was wrong. The serial number on the report didn't match the model listed. It was small, almost invisible, but it was a crack. I need access to discovery, I said. Everything. Hayes hesitated. You're not a lawyer. I don't have to be, I replied. I just need time. He studied my face, then nodded. I'll do what I can. Days later, he returned with copies, surveillance stills, lab reports, timelines. I pored over them like my life depended on it.
Because it did.
The surveillance footage placed the robbery at 10:18 p.m. Lena's statement claimed I arrived home at 9:45 p.m. Mark's phone records, listed as irrelevant, showed multiple calls made near the jewelry store between 9:50 and 10:30. His alibi? He was asleep. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The evidence against me wasn't strong, it was convenient. Every piece fit too neatly, as if assembled by someone who knew exactly what the police needed to see. Then came the breakthrough. A forensic note buried in the lab report mentioned the blood found on my jacket was transfer blood, not impact blood, meaning I hadn't been at the crime scene during the assault. I'd touched someone or something after the fact. Someone like a husband who came home with blood on his clothes and hugged his sister-in-law for comfort. My pulse raced. This wasn't just doubt. This was proof. Why wasn't this flagged? I asked Hayes. He frowned. Because no one was looking for it. That night, for the first time since my arrest, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I felt dangerous. If Mark had framed me once, he'd done it before. Men like him always leave patterns. And if Lena thought her lies would stay buried forever, she was wrong. The truth was there. It just needed someone desperate enough to dig it out. And I was running out of time. The deeper I dug, the more Mark's shadow stretched across everything. From the outside, he was untouchable. A respected businessman. Donations to local charities. Photos online of smiling family dinners and holiday church services. Judges shook his hand. Police officers called him sir. If I said his name in jail, people laughed. That guy, one inmate scoffed. Golden boy? No way. That was exactly why he'd chosen me. Mark needed someone close enough to frame, and disposable enough that no one would question it. A struggling sister-in-law with no savings, no powerful friends, and a history of emotional stress that Lena had carefully emphasized in her statements. I asked Hayes to subpoena Mark's work records. They say he was home, Hayes warned. Your sister confirmed it. She lied, I said. And he paid someone to make sure the paperwork agrees. When the records finally arrived, they were clean. Too clean. No late-night meetings. No business trips. No security badge swipes after 7 p.m. But criminals make mistakes when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Mark had forgotten about the warehouse. One of his companies rented a private storage facility near the jewelry district. Not officially tied to him, leased under a shell company. But the address showed up in an old tax document Hayes dug up. The warehouse security logs showed entry at 9:58 p.m. Badge used marks. My heart pounded when Hayes showed me the page. This puts him less than 2 blocks from the robbery. It's circumstantial, he said carefully. But it's something. Something became everything when another piece fell into place. An inmate named Carlos overheard me talking to Hayes during a legal visit. That night, he slid onto the bench across from me in the common area. You're the one taking the fall for your brother-in-law, right? He asked. I froze. How do you know that? Carlos shrugged. Word travels. And because I used to run errands for a guy who fits his description.
Rich.
Clean cut. Thought jail was beneath him.
My throat went dry.
What kind of errands? Drop-offs.
Pickups. Cash.
Jewelry. I leaned forward. From a robbery? Carlos nodded slowly. Same store you're charged with. I felt the room tilt. He bragged. Carlos continued. Said he had it handled. Said his wife's sister was taking one for the family. My hands shook. Will you testify? Carlos laughed bitterly. I'm already doing 15 years. Snitching just makes it worse. What if I get you immunity? I asked. He studied me for a long moment. Then I'll talk. When Hayes heard this, he went pale. This could flip the case, he said. But it also puts you in danger. I'm already buried, I replied. I've got nothing left to lose. The prosecution wasn't worried until Hayes filed a motion naming Mark as an alternate suspect. That's when Lena finally broke her silence. She came to visit again. This time, she was shaking. They're asking questions, she whispered through the phone. About Mark. About the warehouse. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw fear, not for me, but for herself. You did this, I said calmly. And now it's catching up. Her voice cracked. Please. Just stop. We can fix this. I shook my head. You already chose him. And this time I chose the truth. Once the prosecution realized Mark's name was no longer untouchable, the tone of the case shifted. Not publicly yet, but behind closed doors, everything changed. Hearings were postponed. Motions were suddenly contested instead of rubber-stamped. Detectives who once refused to return calls now showed up with notebooks and tight expressions. Fear had entered the room. Hayes met me in the visitation area with a rare look of cautious optimism. They've agreed to hear Carlos under sealed testimony, he said. If he's credible, this stops being your trial. I exhaled shakily. And Lena? They're re-interviewing her. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because I could feel the lie unraveling, thread by thread. And when lies unravel, the people holding them together panic. Lena panicked first. She showed up unexpectedly during visiting hours, eyes swollen, makeup smeared. This time, she didn't sit straight. She slumped, as if the weight of everything was finally crushing her. "They're threatening me," she whispered. "Perjury. Obstruction. They said I could go to prison." "You should have thought of that before you sent me there," I replied. She flinched. "Mark said it was the only way."
Of course he did.
"He promised it would be temporary," she continued. "That the case would fall apart. That you'd take a plea and be out in a few years." "A few years?" I repeated. "For a crime I didn't commit?" Her sobs broke free. I was scared. He said if the truth came out, everything would collapse. "It already has," I said quietly. She grabbed the phone tighter. "If I change my statement now, they'll know I lied before." "Yes," I said. "And that's the point." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You'd really let me go to prison?" I leaned closer to the glass. "You already let me." The next day, Carlos testified. He described Mark in chilling detail, his voice, his watch, the way he joked about family loyalty while handing over stolen jewelry. He knew things only someone involved would know.
Dates. Amounts.
Locations. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution tried to discredit him, but his story matched warehouse logs, phone pings, and an unexplained cash deposit in Mark's account 3 days after the robbery. That deposit had been labeled a loan repayment. From whom? No one could say. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered Mark's arrest pending investigation. When the news reached the jail, inmates stared at me like I'd performed a miracle. "You flipped it," someone whispered. But the worst was yet to come. Lena was brought in for questioning that same evening. And for the first time, she didn't have Mark sitting beside her, whispering instructions, controlling the narrative. Alone, she folded. She admitted Mark had come home that night shaking, blood on his cuffs. He'd told her it was an accident. That someone fought back. That if the police found out, the kids would lose their father. "And you chose to give them a different one," the detective said. Her confession was recorded.
Signed.
Dated. 3 hours later, my cell door opened. "You're being transferred," the guard said. "Charges are under review." I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding. For the first time since the handcuffs snapped shut weeks ago, I could feel the walls loosening. Freedom was no longer a fantasy. It was a countdown. I was moved out of general population that night. Not to freedom, but close enough that I could taste it. A temporary holding unit.
Cleaner.
Quieter. The kind of place people go when the system realizes it might have made a catastrophic mistake. The next morning, Hayes arrived with papers in his hands and relief written all over his face. "The prosecution is formally withdrawing the charges against you," he said. "Wrongful arrest. Fabricated testimony. Suppressed evidence." My knees nearly gave out. I pressed my palms against the table, grounding myself. "So, I'm free." "By the end of the day," he confirmed. "But there's more." He slid another document forward. A civil filing. The state was opening an internal investigation. Detectives involved were being questioned. Evidence handling was under review. And Mark? He was being charged with armed robbery, aggravated assault, conspiracy, and witness tampering. The man who destroyed my life would finally have to answer for it. I was released that afternoon. Walking out of the jail felt unreal. The sun was too bright, the air too open. I stood there for a long moment, blinking, as if the world might snap back into a cell if I moved too fast. Reporters waited outside. Cameras flashed. "Do you forgive your sister?" someone shouted. I didn't answer, because forgiveness was a luxury I hadn't earned back yet. 2 days later, I was called to testify, this time as a witness, not a defendant. I sat in the courtroom where I'd once been judged without being heard. Mark sat at the defense table, hands clasped, face pale. He didn't look at me. Lena did. She sat behind him, eyes hollow, a woman stripped of her certainty. When I took the stand, my voice didn't shake. I told them about the backpack, the hug, the blood transfer, the warehouse, the lies that stacked so neatly they almost looked like truth. And then I looked directly at Lena. You didn't just lie to the police, I said. You erased me. You watched my life collapse and told yourself it was necessary. She broke down then.
Loud. Public.
Too late. Mark was convicted weeks later. As he was led away in cuffs, he finally turned and met my eyes. There was no apology.
No remorse.
Only disbelief. Lena was charged as well.
Perjury.
Conspiracy. Obstruction of justice. She took a plea deal. When she was sentenced, she looked back at me, tears streaming. I thought I was protecting my family. I stood, steady and unmovable. You were, I said. Just not me. That night, I went home, to an apartment I barely recognized, to a life that felt bruised but breathing. The system issued an apology. A settlement offer followed. Money meant to compensate for weeks stolen from my life. It didn't bring back my reputation. It didn't erase the mugshot that still lived online. But it gave me something else.
Choice.
And the final choice was still ahead of me. The world doesn't reset when you're proven innocent. People think it does, that once the truth comes out, everything snaps back into place. Jobs return. Trust heals. Names are cleared with a single headline. That's a lie. I walked into grocery stores where whispers still followed me down the aisles. Old friends avoided eye contact. Some apologized too loudly, others not at all. The internet never forgets, and neither do people who enjoy believing the worst. But I was free. And freedom, I learned, isn't about being believed by everyone. It's about no longer being owned by a lie. Mark was sentenced to 25 years. The judge didn't soften his voice when he read the verdict. There was no sympathy left for a man who'd hidden behind faith, money, and family loyalty. When the gavel came down, something heavy finally lifted from my chest. Lena received 3 years. Not enough, some said. Too much, others argued. To me, it was irrelevant. Prison time wouldn't undo what she'd done. It wouldn't restore the bond we once had, or the childhood promises we'd made to protect each other. She wrote to me from jail. Long letters. Pages filled with regret, explanations, memories of when we were girls, and the world felt simpler. She begged for forgiveness. She said she was still my sister. I read every word. Then I put the letters away and never replied. Because family isn't defined by blood alone. Family is who stands beside you when the truth costs them something. I used the settlement money to start over. New city, new job, a smaller life, quieter and cleaner. I changed my phone number, deleted old accounts, let the past stay where it belonged, behind me. Sometimes at night the memories still came, the cell door slamming, the glass between Lena and me. The way she'd said, "You're stronger than me." She was wrong about that. Strength isn't surviving injustice. Strength is refusing to become it. One evening, months later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Lena. She'd been granted limited phone privileges. Her voice sounded thinner, worn down by consequences she could no longer escape. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I just needed you to know. I finally told the kids the truth." I closed my eyes. That mattered more than anything else she could have said. "Good," I replied. "They deserve that." There was a pause. "Will I ever see you again?" I thought carefully before answering. "Maybe," I said, "but not as sisters. Just as two people who share a past." She cried softly. I ended the call. I stepped outside and let the night air wash over me. The stars didn't care about crimes or lies or bloodlines. They just existed, steady, distant, honest. For the first time, so did I. Because my sister framed me for a crime to protect her husband. But she lost something far greater than her freedom. She lost me.